Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin unraveling some of the most mind-bending paradoxes ever conceived, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you winding down in a cozy room at home, traveling across time zones in a quiet train cabin, or maybe you're drifting off in a tent under the stars? And what time is it for you? Midnight? 3 a.m.? Or are you starting your day with something contemplative and curious? And if you enjoy falling asleep to deep dives into strange, fascinating, and beautiful ideas like this one, be sure to subscribe. It helps this channel grow, and it means you'll never miss a night of wonder. Now, let's get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow, and let's begin. Paradoxes are more than just logical riddles or quirky statements that twist your thoughts. They are windows into the foundations of how we think, reason, and understand the world. And sometimes they expose cracks in the very things we thought we knew for certain. To begin our journey, we must first understand what a paradox truly is. At its core, a paradox is a statement or situation that, despite seemingly valid reasoning from acceptable premises, leads to a conclusion that appears logically unacceptable or self-contradictory. It creates tension, a tug-of-war between belief and logic, between what makes sense and what simply does not. The word paradox comes from the Greek paradoxon, meaning contrary to expectation. But in the world of philosophy, mathematics, and science, paradoxes aren't just curiosities. They can point toward deep truths or deep problems in the systems we use to make sense of everything. Some paradoxes reveal hidden assumptions. Others expose the limits of language, mathematics, or even physical reality. And some just quietly haunt the edges of human understanding. The liar paradox. This statement is false. Let's begin with a classic. A paradox so simple and so old, yet still unsolved in its essence. The liar paradox. It goes like this. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false, because that's what it claims. But if it's false, then it must be true, since that's what it says. The sentence folds in on itself in a kind of logical Mobius strip. There's no stable place to stand. Truth and falsehood collapse into each other. The liar paradox isn't just a verbal trick. It raises real questions about how we define truth, especially in self-referential systems. The paradox appears in many forms. Epimenides, the Cretan philosopher, famously declared, "All Cretans are liars." If he's telling the truth, then he must be lying. But if he's lying, he might be telling the truth. Modern logicians like Alfred Tarski and Saul Kripke tried to resolve the paradox by creating layered systems of language, where some sentences can refer to others, but not to themselves. But even these systems have limits. The liar paradox whispers something unsettling, that even our most basic ideas about truth might not be safe. Zeno's paradoxes. Motion is impossible. Now, let's travel back over 2,000 years to to ancient Greece, to the paradoxes of Zeno of Elea. Zeno crafted a set of puzzles designed to challenge our intuitive understanding of space, time, and motion. His most famous might be the Achilles and the tortoise paradox. In this scenario, the swift-footed hero Achilles races a tortoise. To be fair, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start. But, as Zeno argues, Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. Why? Because by the time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved a little farther. And by the time Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise has moved again, and so on, forever. Achilles is always catching up, but never overtaking. It seems absurd because in the real world, of course Achilles would outrun the tortoise. But Zeno's logic shows a deeper issue. How can an infinite number of steps, even if each step is smaller than the last, add up to a finite distance? This is a paradox about infinity and about how space and time are divided. It's the kind of problem that wouldn't be truly addressed until the development of calculus over 2,000 years later. Zeno had other paradoxes too, like the arrow paradox, where a flying arrow is said to be motionless at every instant of time, and therefore never moves at all. His puzzles weren't just mind games. They were philosophical bombs aimed at the very concept of change. The paradox of the heap, Socrates' paradox. Here's a question. If you have a heap of sand and you remove a single grain, is it still a heap? Probably yes. But what if you keep removing grains, one at a time? When does it stop being a heap? At 10 grains? At 1? This is the Socrates paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap. It's about vague concepts, ideas that don't have clear boundaries. It appears with other terms too. When does someone go from being tall to not tall? From rich to not rich? The paradox exposes a troubling feature of language and categorization. Many of the terms we use every day don't have strict definitions, yet we use them as if they do. Logic demands sharp lines, but the world and language often refuses to give them. This paradox has implications in philosophy of language, ethics, and law. It raises the question, how do we draw lines where none naturally exist? The barber paradox. Now, imagine a small village with a very particular barber. This barber shaves all and only those men in the village who do not shave themselves. So here's the question, does the barber shave himself? If he does shave himself, then, by definition, he does not shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must, because he shaves those who do not shave themselves. This is the barber paradox, formulated by the great mathematician and logician Bertrand Russell. It's a playful way to demonstrate the kind of contradiction that arises in certain logical systems, especially those that allow for self-reference. Russell's solution led to the development of type theory and had a profound effect on the foundations of mathematics. But the paradox remains a striking example of how simple rules can lead to impossible situations. Let's dive into a realm where paradoxes become almost expected, the world of time travel. Time travel has been a favorite subject of science fiction for over a century. but its paradoxes reveal serious philosophical and scientific challenges. Chief among them is the grandfather paradox. Imagine this: you build a time machine. You travel back to a time before your grandfather had children, before your father or mother was even born, and for some reason, you prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. What happens then? If your grandfather never has children, you could never be born. But if you were never born, you could never build the time machine, and therefore, you could never travel back and prevent the meeting. This is a classic causal paradox. It violates the fundamental logic of cause and effect. And yet, if time travel were possible, in the backward direction, this kind of paradox seems unavoidable. There are a few theoretical ways around it. One idea is called the Novikov self-consistency principle, which says that events in time are self-consistent, meaning, no matter what you try, you could never create a paradox. If you go back in time, events will conspire to ensure your actions fit into history without contradictions. Another theory is that every time a paradox would occur, reality branches into a new timeline, creating a parallel universe where both outcomes exist. In that case, preventing your grandfather from meeting your grandmother might simply create a timeline where you never existed, while your original timeline remains untouched. But none of these solutions are confirmed. And so, time travel remains a playground for paradoxes that twist our understanding of logic, causality, and identity. The bootstrap paradox. Let's take the time travel paradox even further with the bootstrap paradox, also called a causal loop. Suppose a young musician is visited by an older version of herself, who hands her a notebook filled with symphonies. The younger version studies them, learns to compose, and grows up to become the very person who, years later, travels back in time to hand the notebook to her younger self. Here's the question: who actually composed the symphonies? No one. They were never created, at least not in the traditional sense. They exist in a closed causal loop without origin. The information is trapped in a circle. This paradox gets its name from the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, because the cause and effect seem to be lifting each other into existence. The bootstrap paradox forces us to question our assumptions about time, creation, and the flow of information. Can something exist without ever being created? And if so, what does that say about the nature of time itself? The ship of Theseus. Now let's step away from time and into the world of identity with the ship of Theseus paradox. The story goes like this. The ship of the legendary Greek hero Theseus is preserved in a harbour. Over the years, its wooden parts begin to rot and are replaced one by one. Eventually, every plank, every nail, every part of the ship is replaced. Is it still the ship of Theseus? Now imagine that someone took all the original discarded pieces and used them to build another ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that was continuously maintained and updated, or the one rebuilt from the original materials? This paradox has troubled philosophers for over 2,000 years. It's not just about ships, it's about you. You're made of cells that are constantly being replaced. Over the years, almost every atom in your body is exchanged. Are you still the same person? The ship of Theseus challenges us to define identity. Is it continuity or composition? Is something defined by its form, its function, its history, or something else entirely? The unexpected, hanging paradox. Now let's visit a paradox that is both strange and unsettling. It's called the unexpected hanging paradox. A judge tells a condemned prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but the execution will be a surprise. You will not know the day of the hanging until the executioner comes for you." The prisoner reasons, it can't happen on Friday, because if he hasn't been hanged by Thursday, then it must be Friday, and that wouldn't be a surprise. So he eliminates Friday. Then, by the same logic, it can't be Thursday. If he hasn't been hanged by Wednesday, and he knows it can't be Friday, then it must be Thursday. Again, no surprise. He continues this reasoning and concludes that the hanging cannot happen on any day. He feels safe. But the executioner comes on Wednesday, and it is a complete surprise. This paradox is a puzzle about prediction, knowledge, and expectation. It's related to ideas in epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge, and even touches on ideas in logic and self-reference. How can a surprise be logically impossible and yet still happen? As we continue our journey into the realm of paradoxes, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of one of the most mysterious concepts in all of philosophy and mathematics: infinity. Infinity isn't just a very large number. It is an entirely different kind of concept, one that bends the rules of arithmetic, challenges common sense, and exposes deep cracks in the foundation of logic itself. When we encounter paradoxes involving infinity, we are no longer dealing with mere puzzles. We are confronting the outer edges of human thought. Take, for instance, Hilbert's Hotel, a thought experiment proposed by the German mathematician David Hilbert. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. All of them are occupied. Every single room has a guest. Now, imagine that a new guest arrives, hoping to check in. At a normal hotel, this would be a problem. But at Hilbert's Hotel, the manager simply asks each guest to move from room N to room N+1. This frees up room number 1, and the new guest is accommodated, even though the hotel was full. Now imagine that an infinite number of new guests arrive. Once again, the manager makes it work. He asks each current guest to move to the room numbered 2N, doubling their room number. This frees up all the odd-numbered rooms, an infinite number of vacancies, and the infinite new guests are assigned to them. This strange result shows how deeply unintuitive infinity is. You can add to it, subtract from it, even double it, and it remains in some sense the same size. But Hilbert's Hotel is more than just a curiosity. It reveals the strange and paradoxical properties of infinite sets, and it challenges our understanding of what it means for something to be full or to contain another thing. It forces us to distinguish between types of infinity as formalized by Georg Cantor, who showed that some infinities are larger than others, a notion that seems impossible, yet is mathematically sound. Cantor showed that while the set of natural numbers 1, 2, 3 is infinite, the set of real numbers between 0 and 1 is even more infinite. There is no one-to-one correspondence between them. His diagonalization argument, a clever proof technique, demonstrated that real numbers are uncountably infinite, a bigger kind of infinite than the countably infinite natural numbers. This idea that there are hierarchies of infinity shook the foundations of mathematics. Cantor faced immense opposition in his lifetime. Some mathematicians and philosophers considered his ideas dangerous or even blasphemous. But today, Cantor's work is foundational, and yet the paradoxes he unearthed remain disturbing. They whisper that our intuitions about number, size, and space are deeply flawed. Perhaps nowhere are these flaws more dramatically revealed than in the paradoxes uncovered by Kurt Gödel, one of the most brilliant logicians of the 20th century. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, published in 1931, didn't just introduce a paradox. They rewrote the rules of mathematics and philosophy. Gödel proved that in any sufficiently powerful mathematical system, there will be true statements that cannot be proven within the system itself. This shattered the dream of a complete and consistent foundation for all of mathematics, a dream that had been pursued by thinkers like Bertrand Russell and David Hilbert. Gödel's insight was to construct a mathematical statement that essentially says, this statement cannot be proven. If it could be proven, it would be false, and the system would be inconsistent. But if it cannot be proven, then it is true, yet unprovable. This is a kind of liar paradox embedded in arithmetic. It means that there will always be truths beyond the reach of logic, always gaps in our understanding, always doors we cannot open, no matter how brilliant our tools become. The implications of Gödel's theorems reach far beyond mathematics. They touch on computer science, artificial intelligence, epistemology, and even theology. They suggest that no system, not even the most rigorous logical system, can fully contain its own truths. There will always be things that are true, but not knowable. This humbling realization forces us to rethink the very limits of reason. And as we contemplate these limits, we return once more to paradox, not as a mistake in logic, but as a mirror held up to our own cognitive boundaries. Paradoxes like those found in infinite sets or Gödelian logic are not glitches to be fixed. They are signals, warning lights on the dashboard of our intellectual machinery, reminding us that even the cleanest formulas and most elegant proofs rest upon mysteries that defy explanation. We have now seen that paradoxes are not just linguistic tricks or playful games of logic. They are fundamental to how we encounter the world and how the world resists our attempts to capture it fully. Infinity, identity, causality, truth, all of these are shaken and reshaped by paradox. And in the silence of the night, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps there's a kind of peace in knowing that even the greatest minds in history have stood before these same riddles and quietly marveled at their beauty and their depth. Let us linger just a while longer in this conceptual twilight between logic and mystery, where the paradoxes of reasoning expose not only the boundaries of mathematics, but also the contours of the human mind itself. As we dwell within the territory charted by thinkers like Gödel and Cantor, it's worth considering how even our most basic logical assumptions can give rise to puzzles that appear both absurd and undeniable. Take, for instance, Russell's paradox, one of the most infamous discoveries in the foundations of set theory, the very language of mathematics. It's deceptively simple in formulation, yet devastating in consequence. Imagine the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition, it must not. But if it doesn't, then, again by definition, it must. This seemingly innocent paradox, discovered by Bertrand Russell in 1901, shattered the naive conception that any definable collection could be a valid set. Russell's paradox wasn't just a quirky brain teaser, it exposed a fatal flaw in the foundations of early 20th century mathematics. At the time, many believed that all mathematical truths could be derived from a consistent set of logical rules. But Russell's discovery showed that this dream, known as logicism, was built on shaky ground. His paradox forced mathematicians like Zermelo and Frankel to rebuild set theory from the ground up, introducing restrictions and axioms designed to avoid the kind of self-referential definitions that gave rise to Russell's logical loop. Yet, even today, echoes of his paradox linger, like a haunting melody you can't quite forget. And what is self-reference, if not the gateway to paradox itself? Consider the concept of quining, named after the philosopher W.V. Quine. A quine is a sentence that refers to itself in a way that creates a kind of strange loop, a recursive feedback that folds logic inward upon itself. One example might be, "This sentence is false" when read by someone who believes it's true. These are statements that wrap themselves in linguistic mirrors, doubling back in ways that can never quite be resolved. Quines are not just philosophical curiosities. They form the heart of many ideas in computer science, including compilers and self-replicating code. In fact, recursion and self-reference are the hidden gears behind some of the deepest truths in logic, computation, and even consciousness. The moment a system can describe itself, whether that system is a sentence, a computer program, or a human mind, it opens the door to paradox. This is what makes Gödel's incompleteness theorem so profound. It showed that any system rich enough to describe arithmetic can also describe itself, and thus, inevitably, will contain true statements it cannot prove. It is not just a mathematical result. It is a revelation about what it means to know anything at all. In the realm of computing, these paradoxes take on practical significance. Alan Turing, inspired in part by Gödel, formulated the halting problem, which is itself a paradox. Turing asked whether it is possible to write a program that can analyze any other program and determine with certainty whether that program will eventually stop or run forever. His answer was stunning. No such universal program can exist. The attempt to create such a program leads directly into a paradox, a program that asks, What happens when I analyze myself? The result is a version of the liar paradox rendered in machine language, a digital echo of the ancient riddle of self-reference. All of this points to something almost mystical at the heart of paradox. Whenever we build a system powerful enough to reflect upon itself, we create the possibility of contradiction. This is not a flaw, but a feature, an inherent tension in any structure complex enough to think about itself. In this way, paradoxes are like signposts, warning us that we have entered a loop of reflection, a hall of mirrors where certainty dissolves. And perhaps that's where the true beauty of paradox lies, not in its ability to confuse or confound, but in its power to remind us that knowledge itself is fragile. That truth is often tangled, self-reflective, and elusive. Paradoxes don't just challenge logic. They challenge us to think more deeply, to feel more wonder, and to embrace the strange and shimmering boundaries of human thought. As you close your eyes and drift further into sleep, let your mind wander through this landscape of infinite regress and recursive riddles. These are the treasures buried beneath the surface of reason, and they are yours now to carry. As we turn from mathematics and logic toward the paradoxes that haunt our perception of the world itself, we begin to uncover a landscape that is at once deeply intimate and profoundly alien. These are not the crisp paradoxes of numbers and symbols, but the blurry, elusive riddles that arise when we try to make sense of what we see, hear, and feel, when we examine the strange machinery of consciousness itself. The paradoxes of perception ask us, is what we experience real? And if not, what does it mean to call anything real at all? Start, for instance, with the Muller-Lyer illusion. This visual paradox presents two horizontal lines of equal length. One is adorned with arrowheads pointing inward, the other with arrowheads pointing outward. And yet, the line with outward pointing arrows appears longer. Every time. Your eyes insist on it, even when you know they are the same. This is not just a trick of vision. It is a challenge to the idea that we can trust our senses. If what we see is not what is, then what is the role of perception in constructing reality? Can something be real to us, and yet objectively false? The mind seems not to reflect the world, but to interpret it. And often it interprets in ways that contradict the very idea of objective truth. This leads us to the deeper philosophical riddle of phenomenal experience, or what philosophers call qualia, the raw feel of consciousness. The redness of red, the sharpness of pain, the softness of a breeze. These experiences are undeniably real from the first-person perspective, but they resist any attempt to be measured, categorized, or explained from the outside. This creates a paradoxical situation. The most immediate, undeniable aspects of life, our subjective experiences, are also the most difficult to define or share. What does it mean for two people to both see the color blue? Do we see the same blue? How could we ever know? This is the core of the inverted spectrum paradox, a thought experiment that suggests two people might have radically different internal experiences of color and yet behave identically. If your red is my green and my green is your red, but we both call stop signs red and grass green, then how could we ever detect the difference? This paradox challenges the assumption that inner experience can ever be fully known or compared. It suggests that reality might be fundamentally private, that we live in separate, parallel worlds of perception, loosely stitched together by language and convention. But perhaps even more unsettling are paradoxes that arise not from the differences between people, but from the differences between experiences and expectations. Consider the paradox of choice. Conventional wisdom tells us that more choices mean more freedom, and more freedom leads to greater happiness. But psychological research and everyday experience tell a different story. Faced with too many options, people often feel overwhelmed, paralyzed, and ultimately dissatisfied with whatever choice they make. More choice, it seems, can lead to less satisfaction. The logic is inverted. Freedom becomes a kind of cage. This is closely related to what is sometimes called the expectation paradox. The more you expect happiness from something, an experience, a purchase, a relationship, the more likely you are to be disappointed. Anticipation raises the bar, and reality seldom matches it. This is not just a trick of mood. It is built into the psychology of reward. We are wired to predict pleasure, to seek out goals, but the brain often delivers the peak before the event, in the moment of anticipation. When the reward finally arrives, it can feel oddly hollow, as though it were never the goal, but only a symbol pointing back to something already lost. In this way, the pursuit of happiness can become its own undoing. Even the act of observation itself is fraught with paradox. In quantum physics, the observer effect reveals that the mere act of measuring a particle can change its behavior. Electrons do not exist as tiny balls orbiting a nucleus, but as probability clouds, waves of possibility that collapse into a specific state only when observed. The famous double-slit experiment shows that particles behave like waves when unobserved, but like particles when watched. This is not just an oddity of subatomic behavior. It is a deep statement about the nature of reality. It suggests that reality is not a fixed external thing, but something co-created by the act of observation itself. And yet, how do we reconcile this with our everyday experience of a solid, stable world? Chairs don't vanish when we turn around. Apples fall from trees regardless of who is watching. But quantum paradoxes seem to whisper that the solidity of the world is, at some level, an illusion, a grand, consistent hallucination arising from billions of interactions between matter, energy, and mind. This is where the paradoxes of perception meet the paradoxes of physics. They do not contradict each other, but amplify the sense that reality is far stranger than we imagine. So here we are, perched at the edge of knowing, gazing into the fog, of the unknowable. Our senses, so trusted and familiar, become uncertain guides. Our minds, built to find patterns and truths, stumble over contradictions that seem baked into the structure of awareness itself. Paradoxes of perception do not merely confuse us, they reflect us. They are shadows cast by the architecture of consciousness, signs that the very act of understanding may always carry within it a touch of mystery. As you settle deeper into the quiet of your evening, you might find comfort in these thoughts, not in their clarity, but in their wonder, in the realization that even confusion has a kind of beauty, that not everything must be resolved to be meaningful, and that sometimes the most profound truths lie hidden in the tension between what we see and what we know we cannot see. Let us now drift deeper into the fog, where perception and reality begin to blur beyond recognition, into that elusive space where paradox is not merely a disturbance in logic, but a revelation about existence itself. As you listen, you may notice a subtle shifting of your awareness. Perhaps it's a kind of clarity that comes not from solving the paradox, but from understanding why the solution always seems just out of reach. This is the domain where questions grow richer the longer they remain unanswered. One of the most evocative paradoxes in this space is the brain in a vat scenario, a modern reimagining of Descartes' famous doubt. It asks you to imagine that your body is an illusion, your sensations simulated. Suppose your brain, right now, is floating in a tank of nutrients, connected to a supercomputer that feeds you every experience you've ever had. Sight, sound, touch, even memory. If the simulation is perfect, how could you ever know that it's not real? What evidence could possibly disprove it when all evidence comes through the system itself? This paradox isn't just a mental trick. It cuts to the foundation of epistemology, the study of knowledge, and it reminds us that certainty is a luxury we may never afford. Philosophers like Hilary Putnam and later thinkers in the field of simulation theory have pointed out that the brain in a vat problem is not something we can solve, but something we must live beside. Even our most confident knowledge of the world, that water is wet, that fire burns, that the sun will rise tomorrow, depends on assumptions we cannot truly prove. And yet, life continues, vibrant and rich, despite this epistemic fragility. The world of dreams offers a more intimate version of this same paradox. Have you ever awakened from a dream that felt utterly real? In that moment before waking, the dream world was seamless. It had color, weight, time. And when you woke, you didn't prove the dream was false. It simply dissolved. What if waking life is another dream from which we haven't yet awakened? This is the core of Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, a paradox from ancient Chinese philosophy. The sage Zhuangzi dreamed he was a butterfly, but upon waking he wondered, was he Zhuangzi who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he is Zhuangzi? The boundary between the self and its perceptions becomes hazy, unstable, like morning mist that disappears the moment you try to grasp it. we find another paradox, quieter, perhaps, but just as profound, in the problem of qualia transfer. Try to imagine what it's like to be another person, not just what they're doing or thinking, but how it feels to be them. Imagine, for instance, the exact taste of their favorite food, the way their emotions surge or dull, the texture of their consciousness. You cannot. You can guess, empathize, even describe, but you can never be them. This is a fundamental paradox of subjectivity. No matter how much data we gather, no matter how many brain scans or interviews we collect, the inner world remains sealed. This boundary between inner and outer, self and other, is paradoxical because it is both real and artificial. We are separate, yet we constantly affect each other. We share language, laughter, sadness, but we do so across a chasm that can never be entirely crossed. Every human being is an island, and yet we build bridges of uncertain strength every day. Paradox lives in those bridges, in their necessity and in their incompleteness. We might also consider the paradox of expectation versus experience, especially in the realm of pleasure and memory. Behavioral economics and psychology have revealed that we often enjoy an event less in the moment than we remember enjoying it later. A painful hike might be miserable in the moment, too hot, too long, too steep, and yet, in memory, it becomes a cherished triumph. The paradox here is that our sense of what is real shifts depending on when we assess it. Which self is telling the truth? The self in the experience, or the self in reflection? This paradox becomes even more complex when we examine the self itself. The philosopher Derek Parfit introduced thought experiments involving personal identity. Suppose your body is destroyed and reconstructed atom by atom somewhere else. Is that still you? Suppose your memories are copied and implanted into a new person. Are they you or a clone? These puzzles reveal that the self may not be as unified or stable as we assume, and yet we build our entire lives around this assumption that there is a me at the center of all this experience, a constant, like the hub of a wheel. But when we look closely, the hub begins to dissolve. All of these paradoxes, the brain in the vat, the butterfly's dream, the illusions of memory, the failure of perfect empathy, converge toward one quiet truth. We live in a world we do not fully understand, perceived by a mind we do not fully comprehend, shaped by a self we cannot fully define. This isn't a failing. It is the beauty of being human, to know a little and to sense the vastness beyond, to wake each day in a reality that may be more dream than certainty, and yet to love, to wonder, to reach out again and again into that beautiful unknown. So let your thoughts wander now. Let the paradoxes echo quietly in your mind as you drift into rest. Don't solve them. Let them live with you like old friends. Confusing, yes, but endlessly fascinating. And always, always just beyond the reach of reason. Let us return once more to the mysteries of perception, where the boundary between what is seen and what is known softens and sways, like light refracted through water. At first, we may think of paradoxes as intrusions, as problems to be solved. But now, we begin to sense them not as disturbances, but as invitations. Invitations to dwell in a space where ambiguity is not failure, but richness. Where contradiction is not confusion, but complexity. And nowhere is this more evident than in the paradoxes of consciousness, that strange inward flame we all carry, but none can fully explain. Consciousness, after all, is the ultimate paradox. It is the one thing we are absolutely certain of, more certain than gravity, mathematics, or time. And yet it is the one thing science has yet to truly understand. The hard problem of consciousness, as posed by philosopher David Chalmers, is not how the brain processes information, or even how it reacts to stimuli. Those are the easy problems. Difficult, yes, but fundamentally mechanical. The hard problem is this: why does any of it feel like something? Why is there an experience of red rather than just a wavelength of light? Why is there an inner life at all? The paradox is that subjective experience cannot be measured, only described. And yet, it is the most immediate reality we know. This has led some to propose that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but something more fundamental, perhaps a basic feature of the universe, like space or time. This view, called panpsychism, suggests that everything, atoms, electrons, even particles, possesses some form of experience, however primitive. It is not a belief that rocks think or that tables dream, but rather that the ingredients of mind might be woven into the fabric of matter itself. If this is true, then reality may not be a lifeless machine, but a vast ocean of consciousness, flickering at different scales and intensities. It is a beautiful, dizzying possibility, one that challenges both science and intuition. Now imagine this. You are walking down a familiar street. Everything is in its place. The light is the right color. The sounds are familiar. The signs all say what they're supposed to. But something feels wrong. You can't explain it. But the moment has a quality, a texture of unreality. This is the paradox of derealization, a psychological phenomenon in which the world suddenly appears hollow or dreamlike. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. The paradox. Here is that perception remains accurate, but meaning slips away. It is as though the scaffolding of significance has been pulled back, revealing a stage without a play. Many who experience this report a sense of profound existential vertigo. Not fear, exactly, but a realization that the mind plays a larger role in constructing the world than they ever imagined. And from this, another paradox unfolds, one rooted not in philosophy or neuroscience, but in everyday life, the paradox of presence. So often, the more we strive to be present, to be mindful, aware, grounded, the more elusive presence becomes. We grasp at now, only to find our attention slipping away into memories or predictions. We try to hold stillness, only to disturb it by the very act of reaching. It is as if the mind were a pond, And the more we try to see into its depths, the more we ripple its surface. This is not a failure of discipline, but a feature of consciousness. Awareness is not a spotlight, but a dance, a delicate, shifting rhythm that resists being pinned down. To be fully present may require, paradoxically, letting go of the effort to be present at all. All of these paradoxes of consciousness, presence, identity, perception converge into one final mystery: the self. Who are you, really? Are you the body which ages and changes? Are you the thoughts which rise and fall? Are you the memories which can fade or be altered? Or are you something deeper, something beyond definition? This is the self-reference paradox at its most intimate. The mind trying to see itself. It's like a camera turning its lens inward. You can see the effects, the expressions, the traces, but never the source. And yet, you are the source. This is perhaps the most profound paradox of all, that the thing which asks the question is also the answer, and yet can never fully know itself. So now, as your breath softens and your thoughts grow slow, let these paradoxes rest gently in your awareness. Don't chase them. Don't solve them. Let them float like lanterns across the dark waters of your mind, each one glowing with a quiet impossibility. This is not the end of wonder, but its beginning, and you are already exactly where you need to be. Now we turn toward time, that most intimate and inescapable dimension of our existence. Time shapes every moment of our lives, every decision, every breath. And yet, the more closely we examine it, the more unstable it seems. Time is linear, we say. It moves forward 1 second after another. But this too is an assumption, an appearance. And appearances, as we've seen, are often where paradox begins. Let us begin with a deceptively simple idea: the arrow of time. We experience time as flowing from past to future. We remember the past, but not the future. We grow older, not younger. Entropy, the measure of disorder, increases over time. This is the thermodynamic arrow, and it seems to explain why time has a direction. Yet the paradox is this: the fundamental laws of physics are time-symmetric. They don't care whether time moves forward or backward. Newton's equations, Maxwell's, even Einstein's, all are reversible. They make no distinction between yesterday and tomorrow. So why do we experience such a strong sense of forward? Why does time feel like a one-way street when the equations of nature insist it could run both ways? This brings us to one of the strangest ideas in modern cosmology: the possibility that time's arrow is not absolute, but emergent, that it arises from boundary conditions of the universe, from the low entropy state of the Big Bang. But if that's true, then time itself is not fundamental. It is a side effect, a symptom of something deeper, perhaps something we cannot yet describe. This is the paradox of time's illusion, the very thing we take most for granted, that time flows, may not be a basic feature of reality at all. And yet we live in time. We make choices. We regret. we hope. Which brings us to another ancient paradox, one that touches not just physics, but ethics, identity, and agency itself, the paradox of free will. Do we truly choose our actions, or are they determined by our genes, our history, the laws of physics? If every particle in your body obeys deterministic rules, then in what sense are you free? If we rewound the universe to a previous moment and everything happened exactly the same way, would you make the same decision again? Most physicists, and many philosophers, say yes, that free will is an illusion, a story the brain tells itself after the fact. But here's the paradox: we must act as if we are free. Society, morality, law, love, all depend on the assumption that people can choose, that we are responsible for what we do. If free will is an illusion, it is the most functional illusion ever created. And even if determinism is true, we do not have access to the full chain of causality. We do not see the levers behind our thoughts. So from the inside, from the perspective of consciousness, choice feels real. And perhaps that's all it needs to be. A related paradox comes from time travel, and we've touched on this before, but now we approach it from a different angle. Imagine you go back in time and meet your younger self. You give advice, you change their path. But if that path changes, you may never have had the reason or the opportunity to go back in time in the first place. This is the bootstrap paradox, where an event is its own cause. An object or piece of information is passed backward in time and becomes the very reason it exists. Like a book that has no author, or an invention that invents itself. This violates our sense of causality. Normally, causes come before effects. But in time loops, this order breaks down. The cause is the effect, and the effect is the cause. It is circular, and yet, under certain physical theories, it may be consistent. Time loops don't necessarily violate the laws of physics. They violate our intuition. But paradox doesn't always mean impossibility. Sometimes it simply means we need a new kind of understanding. Philosopher J.L. Mackie once proposed a version of the omnipotence paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If they can, then they are not all-powerful because they cannot lift it. If they cannot, then again, they are not all-powerful because there's something they cannot do. This paradox seems simple, even childish, and yet it reveals a deep tension in how we define concepts like power, cause, and ability. It reminds us that our language can betray us, that even the most sacred ideas can fracture under the pressure of logic. And then there is the grandfather paradox, where you go back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. You are never born. But then, how did you travel back in time? This paradox illustrates the problem of inconsistent timelines. One popular solution is the many worlds interpretation, where every choice spawns a new universe. In one, your grandfather survives. In another, he doesn't. Time, in this view, is not a single thread, but a tapestry of infinite branches, each coexisting, each real. This solves the paradox, at the cost of an infinity of selves. In this view, every version of you is real. Every path is walked. Every decision is both made and unmade. As these paradoxes swirl together of time, free will, causality, and choice, a deeper question begins to form, one that lingers long after the puzzles themselves fade. What kind of reality do we live in? One that is fixed and determined, or one that is open and fluid? Are we passengers on a train with a single track? Or are we authors in a branching storybook turning pages we do not yet know exist? Perhaps, in the quiet of this moment, we can rest in the possibility that it is both. That we live in a world where time flows and yet does not, where we choose and yet are shaped, where the past shapes the present and the present reshapes the past. A world not of certainty, but of possibility. Let your thoughts settle into this strangeness now. Let the paradoxes breathe with you like waves against the shore. There is nothing to resolve, no riddle to crack, just the quiet wonder of being here, now, suspended in a moment that, like all moments, is both fleeting and eternal. As we drift further through the quiet corridors of paradox, we enter a domain where reason meets uncertainty, where probability, decision-making, and belief entangle themselves in loops that logic alone cannot untangle. These are the paradoxes that test not the structure of the universe, but the structure of rational thought itself. They show us how easily our minds can be drawn into contradiction, even when every step along the way feels entirely reasonable. Let's begin with one of the most deceptively simple and deeply troubling puzzles in probability. The Monty Hall paradox. You're on a game show. Before you are 3 doors. Behind one is a car. Behind the others, goats. You pick a door. Say, door 1. The host, who knows what's behind all the doors, opens another door. Say, door 3, revealing a goat. He then offers you a choice. Stick with your original pick, or switch to the remaining unopened door. Intuitively, it seems like the odds are now 50-50. 2 doors remain, 1 car, 1 goat. But probability tells a different story. The best strategy is to switch, because doing so gives you a 2-3 chance of winning the car, while staying gives you only a 1/3 chance. Why? Because Monty's action, revealing a goat, carries information. He always opens a door with a goat. That changes the probabilities, subtly but significantly. And yet, even knowing this, the intuition remains stubborn. Our brains struggle with conditional probabilities. The paradox lies not in the math, but in the gulf between understanding and instinct. A cousin to this puzzle is the Sleeping Beauty paradox, which explores the relationship between probability and self-location in time. Beauty is put to sleep on Sunday. A fair coin is flipped. If it lands heads, she's awakened on Monday and then sleeps through Tuesday. If tails, she is awakened Monday and Tuesday, but has her memory of Monday erased. Each time she wakes, she doesn't know which day it is or the outcome of the coin. What should be her belief, her credence, that the coin landed heads? There are two competing answers. The halfer says one how, the coin was fair. The thirder says one fan, because in three possible awakenings, heads Monday, tails Tuesday, only one corresponds to heads. This puzzle reveals how even simple bets can become philosophical riddles when we factor in memory, identity, and knowledge. It challenges our assumptions about probability, time, and what it means to be an observer. Now step into the strange world of Newcomb's paradox, a problem in decision theory that pits free will against prediction. You're offered two boxes. Box A, which always contains $1,000, and Box B, which contains either $1 million or nothing. You're told that a super-intelligent predictor has already filled the boxes. If it predicted that you would take only Box B, then it placed $1 million in it. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it left Box B empty. What do you choose? From a causal perspective, the predictor has already made its decision. Your choice can't affect the past, so take both boxes and get the guaranteed $1,000. But those who believe in the predictive power say, no, the predictor is never wrong. If you take one box, you'll get the million. If you take both, you'll get far less. The paradox here is not about money, but about how we think choices relate to knowledge. If a prediction is perfect, is it the same as fate? And if we believe we are predictable, where does freedom end? Let us not forget the lottery paradox, which arises not from logic, but from the very structure of belief. Suppose there is a fair lottery with 1 million tickets, and exactly one winning ticket. For each ticket, it's rational to believe it won't win. The odds are incredibly low, and yet, you know one ticket will win. If you believe that none of them will win, you hold a logically inconsistent set of beliefs. But if you don't believe that each individual ticket will lose, then you're failing to reason probabilistically. The paradox is that rational belief can lead to irrational conclusions. Logic and probability, two of our sharpest tools, can pull us in opposite directions. And what happens when belief turns inward? Consider the paradox of self-deception. Can you believe something you know isn't true? Can you lie to yourself and believe the lie? On the surface, it seems impossible. To deceive is to know the truth and hide it. But if you know it, how can you believe otherwise? And if you don't know it, how can you be the deceiver? This recursive loop of the self fooling the self is not merely philosophical. It plays out in therapy, in politics, in history. People can hold contradictory beliefs, act against their own interest, ignore evidence. The human mind is not a transparent machine. It is a tangle of hopes, fears, desires, and stories, some of which are told not to others, but to itself. These paradoxes of belief, from game theory to psychology, force us to question the boundaries between logic and emotion, between knowledge and narrative. They show us that being rational is not always a path to clarity. Sometimes it is a labyrinth. And perhaps that is the most profound paradox of all, that the more rigorously we think, the more aware we become of how fragile thought itself is. So, as you rest, let these paradoxes unfold like quiet constellations in your mind. You don't need to resolve them, just notice them. Let them shine softly in the night sky of your thoughts, reminders that even our most careful reasoning leads us back to mystery, to wonder, to that gentle, eternal question mark that lies at the heart of being human. As we drift deeper into this dreamscape of paradoxes, we find ourselves moving from the abstract terrain of logic and probability into the vivid, ever-changing landscape of human life, where social dynamics, morality, and the self collide in ways that defy simple explanation. These are the paradoxes not of theory, but of being. They do not ask for solutions so much as reflection. They live in the way we love, lead, fear, and strive, and they are perhaps the most deeply human of all. Let us begin with one of the oldest and most morally provocative riddles, the trolley problem. You're standing by a set of train tracks. Ahead, a runaway trolley is barreling toward 5 people tied to the rails. You have the power to pull a lever, redirecting the trolley onto another track, where it would kill 1 person instead. What do you do? Do you intervene and sacrifice 1 to save 5? Or do you refuse to act, allowing more to die, but keeping your hands clean? On paper, the choice seems mathematical. 5 lives are more than 1. But the deeper you examine this dilemma, the more it unravels. What if the person on the second track is a loved one? What if the 5 are strangers? What if pulling the lever doesn't guarantee the outcome? The paradox lies not in the arithmetic, but in the weight of action versus inaction. It asks whether causing harm in order to prevent greater harm is morally better or worse. It is a mirror held up to our ethical instincts, and it reveals just how tangled our moral logic can become. Now consider the paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. It says that a tolerant society, if it tolerates intolerance, will eventually be destroyed by it. To preserve tolerance, we must be intolerant of intolerance. This creates a loop. To be open-minded, we must draw boundaries. To defend freedom, we must sometimes limit it. The paradox is not hypothetical. It plays out every day in politics, speech, and law. It asks us to balance 2 competing goods, liberty and stability. And it warns us that even virtues, when unbounded, can become self-destructive. In a similar vein, the Abilene paradox explores how groups can make decisions that contradict the preferences of every individual in the group. Imagine a family on a hot summer day. One person suggests driving to Abilene for lunch. Another agrees, not wanting to disagree. The rest follow, despite secretly dreading the idea. They arrive in Abilene, hot, tired, and frustrated, only to discover that no one actually wanted to come. This paradox reveals how social harmony can lead to collective dysfunction. It shows how fear of conflict can lead to poor decisions, and how silence can masquerade as consent. It is a quiet tragedy, not of evil, but of miscommunication. Let us now turn inward to paradoxes of identity and authenticity. There is the paradox of self-improvement. In striving to be your best self, you must first reject who you are now. But in rejecting who you are, you risk creating shame, fragmentation, or perfectionism. So how do we change without condemning ourselves? How do we evolve while remaining whole? This paradox lies at the heart of therapy, of growth, of healing. It is not easily answered, but it speaks to a deeper truth. That transformation must begin with compassion, not contempt. This leads naturally to the existential paradox, the paradox of meaning. As philosopher Albert Camus wrote, "Life seems to demand meaning, yet the universe offers none. We are creatures who long for purpose, but we live in a world that is silent." This contradiction between desire and reality creates what Camus called the absurd. And yet, in facing this absurdity, Camus found a strange kind of freedom. If the universe gives no meaning, then we are free to create our own. Meaning becomes not a discovery, but an invention. The paradox is that, in accepting meaninglessness, we may find the deepest meaning of all. Another powerful example is the paradox of choice, revisited now in an ethical context. Modern life offers unprecedented freedom in career, relationships, identity, and lifestyle. But with this abundance comes anxiety. Every choice feels loaded with consequence. Every path not taken feels like a ghost life haunting the one you live. The freedom to be anything can become the fear of being nothing. This paradox lies at the heart of the modern self, caught between the desire for freedom and the burden of too much possibility. Even leadership is not spared from paradox. The servant leadership paradox suggests that to lead well, you must serve. That power is earned not through authority, but through humility. But how do you hold authority while remaining humble? How do you guide without controlling? The best leaders in families, teams, nations are often those who do not seek power, but find it thrust upon them. They lead by listening, not shouting. They act with strength, yet admit uncertainty. It is a delicate paradox. To lead by stepping back, to hold influence by letting go. And in relationships too, we find paradox everywhere. The paradox of intimacy says that closeness requires vulnerability, yet vulnerability creates the risk of pain. To be truly known is to be open to rejection. So we hesitate, protect ourselves, hold back. But in doing so, we prevent the very closeness we desire. This paradox lives in every heart that has ever loved and feared and hoped. It is not a flaw. It is a feature of connection. The bridge between souls is always built with risk. So let these social and existential paradoxes settle gently in your awareness. They are not problems to be solved, but companions on the journey of being alive. They whisper that life is not a puzzle, but a process. That meaning is not found, but made. And that wisdom begins not with certainty, but with the courage to live in the tension, to hold opposites in balance, and to let them teach you. As you rest now, let these thoughts become soft. Let them drift like clouds in a wide sky. There is nowhere to go, nothing to fix, just the gentle presence of paradox and the quiet wonder of being human. Language, the tool we use to explain the world, is also a source of paradoxes that blur the line between clarity and confusion. With words, we build civilizations, laws, poems, prayers. But words, for all their power, are imprecise. They stretch and snap, they imply and deceive. And in this paradox, between the need to communicate and the impossibility of perfect communication, we begin to glimpse the fragile elegance of our shared reality. Consider the liar paradox, a puzzle as old as philosophy itself. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. This self-referential loop, small, simple, and eternal, reveals something strange about language. It can refer to itself. It can tangle its own logic into knots. And it doesn't always play by the rules it creates. Language is not a window to truth. It is a landscape, full of echoes and illusions, where meaning is constantly shifting. This paradox of self-reference appears in literature too, especially in metafiction, where the story knows it is a story. In books like If on a Winter's Night, A Traveller by Italo Calvino, or Pale Fire by Nabokov, the narrative folds in on itself. The reader becomes a character. The book becomes about the act of reading. This creates a new kind of paradox, the suspension of disbelief, even when disbelief is the very theme. You know the story is fiction, yet you are moved. You know the plot is constructed, yet you care. The paradox is that fiction reveals truth through lies, that it can illuminate life even while admitting it is made up. Art too is filled with paradox. Take M.C. Escher's drawings, stairs that ascend endlessly, waterfalls that flow in closed loops. These are visual paradoxes, impossible structures, rendered with perfect geometry. They show how the mind tries to make sense of spatial contradictions, and in doing so, creates a new kind of beauty. The eye is fooled and delighted, and in that delight, we find a deeper understanding that perception is not passive, it is creative. We do not merely see the world, we assemble it. This leads us to the paradox of interpretation in art. What does a painting mean? What does a poem say? We ask these questions as if there is a single answer, but art resists finality. Its meaning shifts depending on the viewer, the moment, the history behind it. A tragedy for one person may be a comedy for another. A masterpiece may seem trivial until a single detail transforms it. This is the paradox. The more powerful the artwork, the less it can be pinned down. Its richness comes from its ambiguity, from the tension between artist and audience, intention and response. Even culture itself is paradoxical. Take the paradox of tradition. To preserve a tradition, it must sometimes change. Languages evolve to survive. Rituals are updated to stay relevant. Yet too much change, and the tradition loses its identity. The paradox is that staying the same often requires becoming something new. Cultures are living things. They breathe, adapt, resist. The past is never fixed. It is interpreted, reinterpreted, sometimes rewritten. And this is not betrayal, it is life. Then there is the paradox of progress. As societies advance in technology, comfort, and freedom, new challenges arise. Isolation, distraction, disconnection. The internet connects us instantly to billions of people, and yet many feel lonelier than ever. We can access more information than any generation before us, and yet truth feels more elusive. Progress solves problems and creates new ones. It opens doors and closes others. The paradox is not that progress is bad, but that it is never complete. Every step forward carries a shadow, and learning to walk with that shadow is part of the human path. In language, we find paradoxes of expression. Words like bittersweet, deafening silence, and seriously funny capture contradictions that feel more real than simple statements. Poetry thrives on this. It says what cannot be said directly. It reveals by obscuring. The poet T.S. Eliot once wrote, "Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden. Yet it is through this very breaking that beauty emerges." The paradox is that meaning lives not just in clarity, but in fracture. We see it again in the paradox of censorship and expression. A society that bans offensive speech to protect freedom may end up restricting it. A voice silenced for one reason may not be heard for another. How do we balance expression with respect? How do we hold space for truth without allowing harm? There are no perfect answers, only tensions we must learn to hold. And then there is the paradox of art's uselessness. Art does not feed us. It doesn't shelter or cure or manufacture. And yet we build museums, write novels, compose symphonies. We teach our children to draw, to dance, to imagine. Art is not useful in the way tools are, but it is essential in ways tools cannot be. It gives life texture. It tells us who we are. The paradox is that something without a function can be the most human thing we make. So let yourself settle now into this vast, glowing space of paradox. Let the contradictions of art, language, and culture rise and fall like waves. They are not problems. They are poems. They are mirrors. They are the subtle rhythms that pulse beneath the surface of everyday life. And as you drift further into sleep, know that you are part of this living, paradoxical story. A story still unfolding, still singing, still searching for meaning in the most beautiful and impossible ways. As we near the final chapters of our journey through paradox, we turn now toward the world itself, the natural world, vast and ancient, filled with beauty and contradiction. We look at the sky and see infinity. We look within ourselves and see mystery. The same forces that shape galaxies also guide the folding of a fern, the migration of birds, the curling of our fingers. And within this harmony lies paradox, deep, elegant, irreducible. Let us begin with a question that seems simple. What is life? Biology gives us criteria: metabolism, reproduction, response to stimuli. But the more we look, the blurrier the edges become. Are viruses alive? They replicate, mutate, evolve, but only inside a host. What about prions, strange proteins that can propagate like seeds of disease? The paradox of life's definition is that we recognize it instantly, but struggle to define it precisely. It is as if life is a pattern more than a substance, a process more than a property. Zooming out, we face the paradox of scale in nature. At the macroscopic level, nature is ordered. Seasons change, rivers flow, stars are born and die. But at the quantum level, reality dissolves into uncertainty. Particles appear and vanish. Position and momentum become mutually exclusive. This strange dance, ruled by probability, underlies all we see, yet behaves nothing like the world we know. The paradox is that the solid, predictable world emerges from a seething chaos. Stability is born from instability. In ecosystems, we see the paradox of competition and cooperation. Evolution is often portrayed as a battle, survival of the fittest. But nature thrives on collaboration. Trees share nutrients through underground fungal networks. Dolphins herd fish together. Bees die to defend the hive. Life, it seems, evolves not just through struggle, but through symbiosis. The paradox here is that the fiercest competitor may be the one who helps others thrive. That self-interest and collective interest are not always opposed, but intertwined. Now consider the ship of Theseus, revisited through the lens of identity. If every part of a ship is replaced over time, is it still the same ship? This ancient thought experiment lives within our very bodies. Every cell, every molecule is replaced over years. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? If not, then who are you now? The paradox is that continuity exists in the midst of total change. Identity is not a static structure, but a flow, a memory, a story we tell ourselves and sometimes forget. This leads to the paradox of personal identity in psychology and philosophy. If your memories were erased, would you still be you? If your personality shifted drastically due to trauma, illness, or growth, are you still the same self? The mind, like the body, is always changing. And yet, we speak of ourselves as singular. I am me. The paradox is that identity feels solid, even when it is fluid. that we are many versions of ourselves, bound by a thread we cannot see, yet feel every day. In physics, the Fermi paradox haunts our imagination. The universe is vast, hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars and planets. If life evolved here, why not elsewhere? And if life is common, where is everyone? Why haven't we seen signs of intelligent life? This silence raises deep questions. Are we alone, or are we being ignored? Is intelligent life rare, short-lived, or inward-looking? The paradox is not just in the numbers, but in the silence, in the ache of wondering whether our search is a soliloquy or a conversation. Even time itself carries paradox. The twin paradox in relativity says that if one twin travels near the speed of light and returns, they will be younger than the one who stayed behind. Time, it turns out, is not absolute. It bends and stretches depending on speed and gravity. This is not a metaphor, it is a measurable truth. The paradox is that time, which feels so consistent in experience, is not consistent at all. It is personal, local, relative. Let's now turn to the natural paradox of death. Every living thing must die, and yet, from death comes life. Decay feeds soil. Fallen trees birth fungi. Ashes enrich the ground. Life is not the opposite of death. They are partners in a cycle. The paradox is that death, which feels like an end, is also a beginning. That something so feared can be so essential. And that in accepting mortality, many people report feeling more alive, more present, more grateful. In spiritual traditions, paradoxes flourish. The Tao Te Ching says, "The more you know, the less you understand." Zen koans challenge logic. What is the sound of one hand clapping? These are not puzzles with answers, but tools meant to break the grip of rational thought, to awaken something deeper, intuition, presence, awareness. In this space, paradox is not failure, it is revelation. The paradox of being is that we are both insignificant and extraordinary. Dust in the cosmos, yet capable of poetry. Mortal, yet filled with love. We live on a tiny planet in a minor galaxy, and yet we are the universe looking back at itself. As physicist Carl Sagan said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." This is not contradiction, it is truth seen through a wider lens. So as you drift now, let these natural and existential paradoxes swirl gently in your awareness. Don't grasp them. Let them drift like leaves on water. You are part of this pattern, not separate but woven in. A question, an answer, a mystery. A moment of stillness in a world that never stops becoming. We have wandered through many realms of paradox, logic and time, choice and identity, science and soul. And now, at the threshold of this final chapter, we pause. Not to resolve what cannot be resolved, but to embrace the quiet truth that paradox is not a problem to solve. It is a companion to walk with. It is the whisper that tells us, the more you know, the more you see how much you do not know. This is the paradox of knowledge, that with every answer we uncover, new questions arise. The edge of understanding is not a line, but a horizon. The universe expands, not just in space, but in mystery. Isaac Newton once said that he felt like a child on the shore of a vast ocean, playing with pebbles, while the great sea of truth lay undiscovered before him. Centuries later, that ocean still waits, infinite and shimmering. In the heart of every paradox lies this quiet invitation to stay curious, to remain open, to recognize that certainty is comforting but not always honest, that the mind, no matter how brilliant, cannot grasp all things, and that this not knowing, is not a weakness, but a wonder. The Socratic paradox captures this perfectly. I know that I know nothing. It sounds like humility, but it is also liberation. In releasing the need to master everything, we become free to experience it. There is a strange beauty in this surrender, in letting go of the illusion of total control. Life is not a machine with levers we can pull to ensure outcomes. It is a wild garden, growing in ways we can nurture but never predict. The paradox is that the more we try to force understanding, the more it eludes us. But the moment we become still, open, present, it comes gently, not in words, but in feeling, not in maps, but in quiet presence. In spiritual traditions around the world, this paradox of knowing and unknowing is expressed again and again. In Buddhism, enlightenment is not the gaining of knowledge, but the dropping of illusion. In Christian mysticism, God is known not through logic, but through love. In Sufism, the divine is encountered in the moment the self dissolves. In each of these paths, paradox is not an obstacle, but a threshold, a doorway to something deeper. This is echoed in the paradox of surrender. To gain peace, we must let go. To find ourselves, we must stop chasing. To love truly, we must release control. These are not poetic flourishes. They are lived truths. Every parent knows the ache of giving freedom to a child. Every lover knows the trust it takes to open without demand. Every seeker knows the moment when striving falls away and grace, quiet, unearned, arrives. Even in death, paradox speaks. We fear it as the end. And yet, many who come close to it, in illness, in loss, in near-death experiences, report a deep clarity, a peace, a sense that what ends is not all there is. Whether this is chemical or spiritual is not the question. The paradox is that in confronting death, many people feel more alive. They notice more, love more, forgive more. Life, seen through the lens of death, becomes precious beyond measure. And now, in this moment, as your breath slows, as your mind softens, you are part of this great paradox. You are here, listening, wondering, resting. You are a being of patterns and particles, born of stars, filled with questions. You are the riddle and the reason, the seeker and the sought, the dream and the dreamer. Let go now of the need to understand. Let the paradoxes rise and fall like waves in the dark. They are not threats, they are not puzzles, they are songs, and you, dear listener, are part of the harmony, not separate, not alone, just here, breathing, drifting, remembering that some things are too beautiful to be explained, and that's okay. Good night.